Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.
Dead Reckoning. Part 1. The Gradient. Vera Sokolova drove her heel against the bracing rail, counteracting the slight, stubborn yaw of the pilot's chair as the cutter dropped its speed. Around her, the low, subharmonic thrum of the ion drives vibrated up through the deck plates, and the dry, clinical hiss of the life support recycling unit filtered the cabin air. It was a constant, mechanical pulse she had long since stopped hearing consciously, but would notice instantly if it stopped. The silence out here, on the fringe of the Perseus arm, was a physical pressure, a heavy weight against the hull plates, held back only by structural integrity fields and layers of radiation shielding. "Reach, status report," she said, her voice a low, even murmur that barely carried across the compact, shadow-drenched bridge. "Systems nominal, Captain," the ship's AI replied. "Fuel reserves at 74%. Oxygen saturation at 92%. Primary survey equipment is online and stable. Standard course correction scheduled in 3 minutes." Vera nodded to the empty room, her gaze tracking across the primary navigation display where a web of blue telemetry lines mapped their vector. She made a minor manual adjustment to the thruster alignment, killing a fraction of a degree of lateral drift that had accumulated over the last 12 hours of coasting. The stars shifted on the forward viewport, and a faint structural groan traveled through the soles of her boots. She adjusted the neural link calibration on her wrist panel, a habit before long coasting shifts. Then she stood, stretching her compact frame, her joints popping loudly in the light gravity of the cabin. She walked the 3 paces to the galley, a cramped alcove built into the port bulkhead where every utensil, container, and pouch was secured by magnetic latches. She poured herself a cup of synthetic coffee from the thermal reservoir, watching the dark liquid splash into the bulbous, spill-proof mug with a soft gurgle. The aroma filled the small space, a familiar chemical comfort that tasted primarily of zinc and stale water. But it was hot. She drank it the same way she'd drunk bad coffee since the academy, standing up, back to the wall facing the door. She took a slow sip and called up the active mission log on a secondary handheld pad. The Deep Space Survey was proceeding exactly according to the Bureau's rigid, automated itinerary. There were no major anomalies, no unexpected gravitational variances, and no hardware degradation. It was standard, predictable, and profoundly lonely. 4 years ago, the starboard console had been occupied. Dmitri used to sit there with one boot hooked under the chair and a bad habit of humming low through the final approach. Checklists, the telemetry divided between 2 pairs of eyes. Then a survey run at the fringe of a mapped zone took them into a localized singularity. The hazard sat past a boundary she had marked provisional and left for a follow-up sweep, the kind of thing regulation didn't require and good practice did. Dmitri didn't come back. The inquiry at Core Station cleared her of liability. Nobody could prove the boundary would have shown anything if she had run it down first. She never requested a replacement partner. She had simply learned to monitor both consoles and to run down every boundary herself twice before calling a sector clear. The ship shuddered, sharper than any course correction had a right to feel. Wrong. The mug jumped in her grip. A bead of coffee slipped through the drinking seal and floated briefly upward before the cabin fans caught it. Vera's gaze snapped back to the main navigation display. "Reach, what was that?" "That didn't feel like a standard adjustment." "Course correction complete, Captain," the AI replied instantly, its tone unchanged. "Telemetry indicates we remain on track to reach the designated survey fringe in approximately 6 hours. The external environment shows a localized density spike in the interstellar medium, likely due to solar winds originating from the secondary star system." Vera frowned, setting her mug down on the magnetic pad, the liquid inside rippling in tiny circles against the lid. She returned to the pilot's chair, her fingers flying across the primary touchscreen to pull up the raw propulsion logs. Everything showed green, the numbers were perfect. The diagnostics showed no anomalies in the fuel injectors or the magnetic containment fields of the ion engines. Yet something was off that the logs couldn't name. She spent the next few hours buried in system diagnostics, checking equipment tolerances and updating the mission logs. She had spent months alone on this cutter, and usually the solitude was a comfortable, familiar weight. But today, the silence felt expectant, heavier than usual, like the quiet before something happens. The survey point finally loomed ahead on the long-range scanners. It was a massive, swirling vortex of interstellar gas and cosmic dust, glowing a contaminated purple on the spectrographic display, a place where the Bureau suspected rare heavy elements were pooling in the gravity wells. She ran through the standard survey protocols, her hands moving swiftly over the controls as the ship's instruments hummed to life, projecting columns of raw electromagnetic data across her peripheral displays. "Reach, begin primary survey sequence," Vera said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Acknowledged, Captain," the AI replied. "Survey sequence initiated." Passive scanners expanding sweep across all spectrums. The hull vibrated softly as the specialized sensor arrays extended from the bow, probing the depths of the gas vortex. Vera's eyes were fixed on the data streaming in, her mind working to analyze the density fluctuations, mapping the shifting currents of radiation. And then, just as the survey sequence reached its midpoint, the primary console let out a sharp, high-priority electronic chime. A flashing notification banner cut across her data stream, displaying the encrypted, triple-sealed signature of the Bureau. Vera raised an eyebrow. Direct mid-route transmissions weren't uncommon. The Bureau scattered routine updates across the sector grid constantly. She hovered her fingers over the console, pausing for a second as her eyes flicked to the viewport. Outside, the stars held still, the ship's bow cutting a dark line against them. She tapped the screen to accept the transmission. The console screen flickered, the primary data feed compressing to accommodate an unrolling stream of alphanumeric text. The Bureau's logo sat at the top. A stylized, sterile compass rose on a dark blue background. Vera scanned the text quickly, expecting a bureaucratic update regarding sector reassignment or a routine adjustment to her post-survey cargo drop-offs. This one was different. It contained a specific set of raw coordinates, buried inside a low-priority routing update, with instructions to append them to her current flight path as a secondary baseline check. There was no explanation, no context, and no human signature attached to the bottom. Just an automated data tag from a core mainframe, date stamped months before she left port. She read it twice. High-priority encryption on a low-priority label. If the Bureau wanted her somewhere, they sent an order. They did not hide coordinates inside housekeeping traffic and hope a pilot noticed. Whatever this was, someone had wanted it, followed without anyone asking questions. She filed that thought and kept her voice even. "Reach, update the active mission plan with the new coordinates from the Bureau packet," she said, though her brow furrowed slightly as she analyzed the vector. The Bureau's destination was a rough baseline marker, a wide patch of nothing parked at the near edge of the dark zone behind the vortex, the kind of approximate boundary line a core mainframe scattered across a sector to fill gaps in the survey grid. "Acknowledged, Captain," the AI replied. "Mission plan updated. Recalculating survey loop trajectory. Estimated arrival at the secondary coordinates will add 48 hours to the current mission duration." The ship's internal systems hummed, adjusting the automated flight paths in the background. Vera watched the stars shift slightly through the viewport as the attitude thrusters made the necessary corrections, pushing Reach onto its new course. The hours passed in a slow, monotonous crawl as the survey completed its automated sweep of the gas cloud. Her movements became relaxed again, driven by muscle memory. She checked the life support manifolds, verified the water recycling output, and logged the final data packages for later transmission. Then she poured a cup of water from the galley dispenser, the taste entirely neutral, stripped of personality by the ship's triple-filtered system. Vera walked to the forward viewport, resting her hands against the cool, bead-blasted metal of the structural frame. It vibrated faintly under her hands, a subtle resonance carrying her constant, unyielding motion through the void. Outside, the stars shone like cold diamonds against the absolute blackness, and the gas vortex glowed a faint, dying red at the edge of the dark. The ship felt incredibly small, a fragile bubble of alloy and oxygen adrift in an uncaring expanse. Her eyes drifted to a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the edge of the viewport frame, a tiny imperfection in the otherwise flawless metal, worn smooth by years of previous scouts sitting exactly where she was sitting now. She traced its length with her thumb, her nail clicking softly against the metal seam. She turned in for the night, crawling into her narrow bunk. The cabin lights dimmed automatically, leaving the bridge in a deep, shadowed blue. She fell asleep to the steady, rhythmic breathing of the life support. Part 2: The Insomnia. Numbers. Red behind her eyelids, a jagged sequence strobing in sync with the sound she couldn't place, metal tearing somewhere below her. She woke with her heart hammering, skin cold in the recycled air. 0, 4, 4, mark, 9, 2, 1, alpha. She swung her legs over the side of the bunk, her breath shaking in the cold air of the cabin. She didn't bother putting on her boots or her flight jacket. She stumbled barefoot onto the bridge, the pale blue glow of the active console cutting across the dark. Reach, log entry, she rasped, her throat dry and constricted. Acknowledged, Captain, the AI replied. Log entry initiated. You are entering a manual update at 0314 ship time. Vera entered the coordinates from her dream, her hands shaking and exact. The numbers streamed across the screen, a jumbled mess of digits and sector tags that made no rational sense. She added a high-priority flag to the file. Anomaly logged, Reach said, its voice flat. Captain, those coordinates do not resolve to any known Bureau sector or stellar object. They are exact to the meter, with no rounding and no margin, and they point far past the Bureau baseline marker, deep inside the dark zone behind the vortex, to a fixed position in empty space. There are no survey directives assigned to that region. Vera's eyes narrowed, her focus locking onto the pulsing red icon that now sat on her navigation chart like an open wound. Run a full diagnostic on the primary navigation core, Reach. Check for data corruption, telemetry degradation, or memory leaks in my neural link interface. I want to know if my cybernetics are throwing artifact data into my subconscious. Diagnostic initiated, the AI responded. A progress bar crawled across the secondary monitor, casting a green tint over her bare feet. Vera walked to the galley, tapping her thumb against the worn metal seam of her flight suit. The coffee maker was cold, the remnants of yesterday's brew congealed at the bottom of the pot. She poured the lukewarm, bitter liquid into a cup and drank it down in 3 long swallows. Diagnostic complete, Reach announced. The navigation core is operating within optimal parameters. No data corruption or software anomalies detected. Your neural interface baseline is stable. Your neural readings are within standard parameters, with the exception of a cortisol spike. Vera didn't answer. She stared at the pulsing icon. The numbers from the dream seared themselves into her brain. The second night was worse. She avoided her bunk entirely, fearing the moment the lights would drop, falling asleep in the pilot's chair instead. She woke at 0400 to the sound of her own ragged breathing, her fingers twitching against the armrests. The coordinates were identical, but this time they came with images, a strip of white hull plating scorched black at the edges, a glove spinning slowly in the dark, limp and empty, and her own face staring back from a shattered viewport, still venting air into the void. By the third morning, the lack of sleep had hollowed her out completely. Her skin felt dry and tight from the recycled air, and dark circles framed her bloodshot eyes. She stood before the console, her thumb resting on the metal seam, clicking her nail against it over and over. A staccato rhythm, something between obsession and cold certainty. She called up the Bureau's official mission file again. The planned route stretched out before her like a safe, predictable thread, mapping a neat loop around the vortex before heading back toward civilization, the baseline marker sitting fat and approximate near its outer edge. The dream coordinates sat millions of kilometers past that edge, a single exact point pulsing in the deep dark, far past the Bureau's boundary. "Captain," Reach said, breaking the long silence of the cabin. "Your vitals suggest elevated stress and severe sleep deprivation. Reaction times are degraded by 24%. It is recommended that you cede manual control to the automated flight system and rest for a minimum of 8 hours." Vera looked at the scratch on the viewport frame. It gleamed faintly in the console light, the one fixed thing in 3 days that no longer made sense. She thought about the map. "Cancel the Bureau survey loop, Reach," Vera said, her voice hollow but entirely steady, devoid of the hesitation that had plagued her for 3 days. "Plot a direct, high-acceleration intercept vector to the logged anomaly coordinates." A prolonged, heavy silence filled the cockpit. The AI's logic gates seemed to hesitate, processing the direct violation of standing orders. "Captain, deviating from an active Bureau assignment without explicit administrative clearance is a Tier 1 protocol violation. Penalties include immediate suspension of flight credentials, forfeiture of contract earnings, and a mandatory psychometric review at Core Station Prime." "I know the regulations, Reach. I signed the handbook. Plot the damn course." "Trajectory updated," the AI replied, its tone reverting to its standard, unjudging flat cadence. "Engaging main drives on your authority, transitioning to high acceleration vector." The ship groaned, a deep structural strain that traveled through the primary bulkheads as the ion drives flared to life at maximum thrust, tearing Reach away from her safe, mapped route and plunging her into the unlit, unmapped void of the dark zone. Part 3. The Descent. The transit took 72 hours of suffocating isolation. Without the routine of the survey to occupy her mind, Vera barely ate. The stars hummed still beyond the viewport, a fixed field against absolute black, and the dread in her stomach was not the kind she could think her way through. She spent hours standing at the forward viewport, her forehead pressed against the cool glass, watching her own breath fob the pain. A small droplet of condensation would form, hold its ground against the vibration of the hull, and then slowly slide down into the metal frame, leaving a faint streak behind. She spent the second day of the transit checking her equipment, stripping down her emergency survival suit, and re-greasing the seals. It was unnecessary work, but it kept her hands busy, kept her from staring at the countdown timer on the main display. Every mechanical component of the ship was performing perfectly, which made it worse. If the ship were failing, she could fix it. If the computers were glitching, she could recode them. But the ship was healthy. The deviation was entirely her own. "Approaching destination coordinates," Reach announced on the third day, the sudden voice breaking the multi-hour silence like a physical blow. "Dropping below cruise velocity. Commencing deceleration burn. Maneuvering thrusters shifting to active stabilization mode." Vera snapped out of her trance, dropping into the pilot's seat and pulling her safety harness tight until the belts bit into her shoulders. "Bring up the visual feed on the primary array. Passive scanners only. I don't want us broadcasting any active radar, LiDAR, or high-frequency sweeps. If there's something out here, I want to see it before it sees us." The forward viewports cleared as the braking thrusters fired with short, rhythmic gasps that vibrated through the frame. The ship drifted past a dense, localized dust cloud that had blocked their long-range line of sight, and Vera's breath caught in her throat. They were flying into a graveyard. The space ahead was choked with a massive, completely unregistered debris field that stretched out for kilometers in every direction. The shapes floating in the dark were far too geometric, too sharp, too deliberate to be products of nature. Massive, jagged fragments of titanium hull plating, shattered white ceramic thermal tiles, severed structural ribs, and frozen droplets of solidified hydraulic fluid drifted lazily through the void, glinting like broken glass in the faint light of the distant stars. "Reach! What am I looking at?" Vera whispered, her hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles turned white, her eyes darting from one floating shape to another. "Is this an unregistered freighter? A corporate smuggler that took a bad jump?" "Composition analysis indicates high-grade military and deep space scouting alloys," the AI reported, its systems running quietly as data filled the screens. "The wreckage is entirely cold. No thermal signatures detected on any wavelength. No active power cores or radiation leakage. The debris distribution indicates a catastrophic, explosive structural failure originating from the interior of the vessel." "Bring us in closer," Vera commanded, her eyes wide, scanning the floating graveyard for a name, a hull number, anything that could give the slaughter a context. "Isolate the largest contiguous fragment in the central cluster." Reach glided deeper into the debris field, its maneuvering thrusters emitting tiny, precise sighs of gas that sounded like quiet gasps in the dark cabin. The shadow of a twisted solar array swept across the bridge, plunging the cockpit into temporary, terrifying darkness before the external floodlights automatically clicked on, casting long, stark shadows across the wreckage. A massive section of a ship's forward hull rolled slowly into the high-intensity glare of the spotlights. The metal was scarred, gouged by hypervelocity micrometeoroids and torn open, the crew cabins and environmental ductwork exposed and crushed. Vera leaned forward, her face inches from the primary display screen. Her breath stopped. There, stamped into the scorched titanium plating in bold, pristine black block letters, was the vessel's registration code and name. R-C7749, the Reach. "Search the matching registry database," Vera said. Her voice came out wrong. "Tell me it's a ghost duplicate. Tell me it's a structural match for a sister ship in our production line. Tell me it's an old hull that was salvaged and re-registered." "Processing," the AI said, its cadence flattening into bare recitation, numbers read out with nothing behind them. "Registry numbers match this identical vessel. The metal matches our fabrication batch. Same tolerances, same repair signatures from Core Station Prime. Scanning the dead hull's emergency beacon metadata. It was Reach's own registry tag. She already knew it. She'd stared at it in the commissioning papers." The computer let out a high-pitched electronic beep, routine and wrong in the silence. A corrupted data tag flashed on the main screen, recovered from the frozen, unpowered memory storage of the floating wreck. "Mission record recovered," Reach said. "Catastrophic structural failure. No survivors." Reach offered nothing further. Whatever protocol covered this, it was above the AI's clearance to speculate. Vera looked down slowly at her active console clock, her eyes wide and unblinking, the light reflecting off her pupils. The digital numbers glowed with a soft, indifferent blue light. The failure stamp put it 53 days from now. Exactly 53 days. She was looking at her own grave, drifting in the silence of an unmapped sector. Part 4. The Anchor. Her stomach turned over first, a cold lurch like the drop before a jump burn. Then her hands went numb and distant, as if they belonged to someone standing behind her. She pressed her palm flat against the display, chasing a warmth that wasn't there, and for one long breath she was 19 again, standing outside a review board at the academy, waiting to be told she had failed and could go home. The cockpit went silent. The wreck outside didn't move. The dreams hadn't been an anomaly, and they hadn't been a warning. They were simply the echo of an impact that hadn't happened yet. "Captain," Reach said softly, its voice dropping an octave as an automated safety protocol overrode its standard performance parameters. "The debris field is shifting due to our localized gravitational wake. Several Class 4 fragments are on an intercept vector. We are at extreme risk of collision if we remain stationary within the cluster. Outside the viewport, something moved. A long spar of structural framing, tumbling end over end, its shadow sweeping across the dead hull's name before it cleared the floodlights and disappeared back into the dark. Vera's focus didn't waver from the screen. 53 days. Her hand found the throttle before she told it to. One burn, that was all it would take, drives to full, and reach would tear free of the debris field and the dying gravity well of the vortex both, back toward the shipping lanes, toward Core Station, toward every safe and ordinary thing she had left behind. Her fingers curled around the control. For one full second she meant to do it. Then she thought of the buried coordinates again, the high-priority seal on a low-priority label, the absence of a human signature. She had been right to call it planted. She had been wrong about why. No one at the Bureau had been hiding an order. Whatever it was, further out, further up the chain than any clerk at Core Station, had simply needed her here, looking at this, on this exact day. She would never know who, or what, had reached back to put those numbers in her dream. The not knowing didn't matter anymore, not when the numbers had been right. Her hand stayed on the throttle. She did not push it forward. No one would know if she did. The coordinates would stay blank, the wreck would stay unmapped, and somewhere in the next 53 days she would either find her way back here or she wouldn't. But she had seen what incomplete maps cost. The singularity that took Dmitri had sat past a boundary she'd left blank, a hazard she had marked in pencil instead of running it down. The chart said clear. The charts had been wrong. She would not leave another ghost in the dark. She would finish the map even if it ended at her own bulkhead. She let go of the throttle and put her hands on the controls. A second fragment crossed the floodlight beam, closer than the first. Hull ceramic, still white on one face and black on the other where the heat had found it. It turned slowly as it passed, unhurried, the way all things moved out here, on their own trajectories, in their own time. With trembling hands, Vera unlocked the long-range communications array, flipping each safety switch in sequence. Her fingers moved methodically across the secondary console, setting the high-gain transmitter dish to maximum power, aiming it directly back through the purple gas vortex toward the distant Bureau relay network. She uploaded everything. She attached the raw sensor data, the metallurgical signatures, the high-resolution images of the scorched white hull, and the impossible metadata timestamp from the dead beacon. She verified the packet integrity twice, her eyes moving between the transmission bar and the viewport, where the debris field drifted and rotated with the slow patience of things that had nowhere else to be. The ship's stabilizers fired, a low vibration through the deck, holding them stationary while the shifting debris field pulled at the hull. She didn't know if the signal would punch through the vortex interference. She sent it anyway. Finally, she opened the master flight log to close out the transmission. She didn't write an explanation or an appeal. She didn't record a goodbye. She just typed 4 words into the terminal, lowercase and precise. Survey path cleared. End.